Morning everybody, happy Saturday. Now I have two pieces of really good news that are both related and very quick. First one is we've got coffee, don't panic. I know we had the coffee sort of scare yesterday. I know you were all really stressed out without my usual sort of coffee fixture, but we have coffee. And the second piece of good news, I have a new mug. It's the same beautiful whale blue, but it's a different shape. This is called a tulip mug. So cheers, happy weekend, happy Saturday. That's very hot. I think it's time for a daily question. What do you say? So today's question comes from Emily Hintz, who really enjoyed day 22 of the Daily Language Diary, where I talked about how learning all these languages has completely changed my life forever, and I shared a really nice collection of some of my favorite stories and just ways that language learning truly has changed the entire trajectory of my life. So Emily says, these were such beautiful and inspiring stories. This was the perfect video to end my day with. Thank you, Emily. I'm really glad you liked it. In this video, you mentioned that you've had a lot of great experiences with podcasts and books. I would love to hear part 2 of this video. I often have trouble with finding content in the languages I want to learn. To be fair, I'm also pretty bad at doing this in English too. Do you have any tips as to how to find interesting podcasts, YouTube channels, or books to read? Well, Emily, it's no secret that using podcasts, TV shows, and dramas, and movies, and books, these are all a crucial part of how I learn languages, especially as I start to approach the higher levels. So I'll be happy to do my best to share some of the ways that I go about finding authentic content in the languages that I'm learning. Much better. So the first thing I'll say is that the steps I'm about to outline and these sort of simple processes that I go through to find authentic language learning content, I usually front load these activities so that I do them fairly early on in my language study. Now, of course, I will continue to look for things over time, and you can certainly do this at any stage. But for me, there are a few reasons why I really like to do this near the beginning. So the first thing is that I find this to be actually very motivating. Although it is a bit painful, I will say I've never really had an easy time finding this authentic content. Even languages like Japanese, where I ended up finding so many just amazing TV dramas over the years, and also Japanese has an incredibly rich cinematic history, or like French, where there are just so many wonderful novels and especially films. I studied a lot of French films. But in all those cases, it was still a pretty painful process because inevitably you're gonna basically spend quite a bit of time watching the first 5 minutes of stuff you don't like, or listening to the first 30 seconds of songs you don't like. However, the cool thing is that once you do this, you end up with this awesome little catalog of inspiration and motivation. It's really exciting to know that, okay, I've already done the work. I have these 3 amazing movies that I can't wait to watch in the language. I have these 2 novels that I can't wait to just dive into one day. In the past, I was actually learning Finnish, and I actually still would like to get back to learning Finnish one day. It's kind of an interesting story. I have a particularly interesting history with Finland and the Finnish language. Now, I never really got terribly far with Finnish, but the first time I visited Helsinki to meet a couple of my really close friends who lived there, one of the first things I did was go straight to a bookshop. And I ended up getting a children's story, but I also got this really nice set of novels. I think there were 2 from the same author, and I had talked to the owner of the bookstore, and we had sort of figured out that these were both the type of thing I was looking for, sort of lighthearted, funny, a sort of romantic side to them, but a little bit of drama. And then even after that, I remember I was sitting in a Starbucks cafe in the center of Helsinki, and I was trying to read a few pages of that children's book. And there was a somewhat older lady next to me, and I got stuck, and so I actually asked her, hey, do you mind helping me just understand what this sentence means? I'm having a bit of trouble. And this actually is a technique that I have used a lot to make friends and meet people in different languages when I'm in a different country that speaks the language. And she was just blown away at the fact that I was actually reading a book in Finnish, even a children's book. And so I took that opportunity through our conversation to ask her for recommendations, and she ended up recommending another novel. Now, the mind-blowing part of this story is that after she said goodbye, she actually went upstairs where the bookshop was, and she bought me that book, and she came down and gave it to me as a gift because she was so delighted that I was learning Finnish and really making an effort. The reason for that story is to express that even with a language like Finnish, where not only am I still a beginner, I'm not even studying it actively right now, and it might be quite some time before I get back to finish. But even then, I'm collecting these resources ahead of time, and it's so nice to know that they are waiting for you when you get to the right level to properly sort of appreciate and embrace and dive into them. I love this new mug so much. Like, isn't that shape just, the color, it's just splendid. So now onto the meat of the topic. So how do I actually go about finding these authentic resources? So I just shared one tip in that story, which is that if you have the luxury of being in a place where the language is spoken, or if you can find, for example, a bookshop that maybe is owned by a speaker of that language, or in some cases you might even find a bookshop that is specifically for selling books in French or Japanese, for example. Well, in those cases, oh my gosh, I will just leap on the opportunity to talk to the owner of that store. There have been so many times when I visited Lyon in France, and I just, oh my God, I talked the ears off the owner of the bookstore, just asking for recommendations, and you get some of the most beautiful conversation practice out of that. It's a wonderful way to actually create opportunities to speak the language. But typically those people, they will be able to give you some of the best recommendations because they're going to ask you questions about what you're looking for, your personality. They will also infer certain things from just the conversation, and they will usually give you genuine, well thought out recommendations, and I've never gone wrong. Now let's say you're not in the country and you're just at home. So nowadays what I tend to do is, if you have access to a streaming service, now this could even be YouTube, but of course it could also be something like Netflix, then what I will do is I'll first try to just do a search for all of the films, for example, that are in that language, and then I will narrow it down by genre. Now for me personally, I tend to favor things like romantic comedies, anything that's sort of lighthearted, maybe a little bit of drama. But in the beginning, certainly, I'm not going to go for like a really complex detective story or the kind of thing where you have 4 or 5 different stories in parallel and there is a deep philosophical message behind it and it really melts your mind thinking about what's going on. Now, with that being said, in Japanese, my favorite ever novel is Yogisha X no Kenshin, and there was actually a movie also made from that, and it was just the most spectacular experience, but it was also bloody hard. It is a story about a sort of mathematical genius and a physicist genius. One of them works for the police, one of them is a teacher, and it's like the two of them trying to outsmart each other to cover up a potential murder, or we don't really know. So that was a pretty challenging one, but in that case, my Japanese was pretty advanced, and also I was so motivated to get through that story. So I will tell you this, I think that when you're finding authentic content, I do suggest that you search for things in those kind of lighthearted, romantic comedy sort of genres, at least when you're starting out. But at the same time, if you find a movie or a TV show or a podcast or a book, any of these things that really speaks to you, then I say go for it, because that motivation alone can certainly carry you through. Because one of the big challenges with authentic content in a foreign language is just staying motivated enough to stick with it, to get through whatever it is you're doing. So like I said, I'll go to Netflix maybe, I will narrow it down by genre as well as language, and then what I will do is scroll through, and I'll be totally honest, I just pick a few, maybe 4 or 5, that kind of jump out to me and that look like nice stories. But then what I do is I go to Google and I actually start searching for sort of like top 5 movies I should watch or top 10. And I'll tend to sort of cross-reference these and see if any of the ones I picked actually show up. And then essentially I sort of go through and I'll read a few reviews, maybe watch the trailer, and it is a bit of a painful process. And almost always you will watch, like I said, the first few minutes of something that just does not speak to you at all. But the cool thing is, it's like once you find one gem, it becomes a lot easier. So again, with movies and TV shows, I'll either start with a streaming service that has access to those kind of movies, I'll see what's available, and then I will sort of go to Google and maybe cross-reference sort of top 10 movies you have to watch in French, or I will just directly start at Google. So I'll directly Google, because there's almost always an article about the top 10 French movies you have to see. And often these are not even language learning articles, they're maybe just film fanatics and people just saying, hey, I love international cinema, and here are 3 Romanian films that you have to watch. Now for things like music, I used to use YouTube actually, because this was before Spotify was as good as it is now. And I would actually use sort of YouTube's recommendation engine to my advantage, and I would click through like playlists that people had made in certain songs, and again, it is very painful, but the beautiful thing is that again, once you find that one song that you like, then all of a sudden you sort of look at related things. Maybe you look at the same artist and see what other songs they have done. And then usually I end up, through this sort of painful process, I end up with 3 or 4 songs that I like. And then over time, I end up just acquiring more and more. Now, these days I will use Spotify. So you can almost always go to Google Translate if you don't already know how to say, you know, Italian music and then musica italiana. And then I will search in Spotify for a playlist. But again, I will use the actual native language. And so I'm trying to find playlists that native speakers have created. And same thing, I'll just spend some time shuffling through. Maybe I'll play it in the background while I'm working or something. And then every time I find a song, I'll make my own playlist. And the cool thing is about services like Spotify is that once you have about 4 or 5 or 6 songs, well, then you actually can start to use their recommendation engine, and it will actually help you find songs. And you know, at least like 3 out of 10 times, you might actually like the song, and before you know it, your playlist grows. In Swedish, I actually recently went through this process and I was trying to find a podcast. And to be honest, I just Googled Swedish podcasts and I did find a few that were not very good. I tried listening to this like news in slow Swedish thing. It didn't really speak to me, but pretty quickly I found 2 podcasts that were actually ones that are very, very popular with native Swedish speakers. I listened to those, and I'll be honest, at the moment, those are a little bit too difficult for me, but I have them ready. I do still listen to an episode every now and again. Usually I'll stop after like 5 to 7 minutes because I'll be honest, I struggle really badly to truly follow what they're saying. But I do have these little gem moments where I can follow exactly what they're talking about for a few minutes, and that helps me really stay motivated. And it makes me excited to put it down and come back in a few weeks and see if I can follow even more. And the same thing goes for YouTube channels. On YouTube, you have this ability to search for things that are trending. So sometimes I will actually search for channels or videos that are really trending in a certain language. In French, there's a bunch of awesome, really hilarious YouTubers, but I used to watch one guy called Norman. And at one point, I actually transcribed one of his videos that I found particularly funny, and I had a French-speaking friend of mine correct my transcription, and I learned a bunch of really funny slang and stuff that you would just never learn in a textbook or any of these things. Because YouTubers like that will tend to be using things that are very, very sort of time relevant cultural references and slang that is very, very now. Okay, Emily, I hope that helps you. To summarize my strategy for this, I do utilize search engines like Google a lot, and I will start to look for articles. Now, sometimes those will be articles written for language learners. So very often if you search for like movies or TV shows that you should watch in Romanian or Russian, you'll often notice that one of the top results is from Fluent U. They have written a lot of great articles that sort of summarize top 10 X or Y that you should watch in language X. But I don't limit myself to articles written for language learners. Sometimes I will just find, again, film fanatics that like international movies and that write lists of films you should see, and they're not meant for language learners. And then also, depending on what level you have, or you could also use Google Translate in many cases now that it's getting easier and easier to at least get the gist of a web page or an article. I will sometimes also search for articles written in the target language that are also, again, maybe TV critics or film fanatics or bloggers that are simply writing a curated list of content that they really enjoy for fellow speakers of their language. Again, for music, I'll use things like Spotify and really take advantage of things like recommendation engines. Once I'm able to get just a few songs that I like, after that, it's off to the races. And for podcasts, it's great because most podcasts are so accessible. And again, you can usually find articles either in English or your native language talking about what the most popular podcasts are. And very often they're separated by genre. It's really, really cool. All right, so I would love to hear from any of you what strategies you have used for finding authentic language learning content in the language you're learning. Let me know if these tips were helpful, and I will see you back here tomorrow for day 28 of the Daily Language Diary.